Hello and welcome. My name is Knudson, and today we are going to be settling the Great Phil dispute. Who is the greatest poker player of all time? What initially struck me to choose this as my research topic for this semester was a clip from High Stakes Poker After Dark, in which Phil Hellmuth proclaimed himself to be the greatest poker player of all time, undisputed by anybody else. Except Daniel Negreanu at the table, who shot this down pretty heavily and asserted that Phil Hellmuth is not better than Phil Ivey at virtually anything, let alone the game of Texas Hold'em. After seeing this clip, I thought what better of an opportunity to really deep dive and explore the battle of the Phils and who is the greatest of all time. So today, we are going to be discussing an analysis of Phil Hellmuth's proclaimed GOAT status and the threat of the enigma that is Phil Ivey. Before we can even discuss GOAT status, we first need to introduce the two major players that we are going to be discussing in today's analysis. The first of which is the self-proclaimed poker GOAT himself, Phil Hellmuth, and also known as the Poker Brat by the poker community. Phil Hellmuth is one of the most notable faces and household names in the game of poker, and he is very famous for his stage presence and his large meltdowns, almost childlike tantrums in the poker room. However, he received his first ever WSOP championship bracelet in the year 1989 and has continued on as a major name ever since. He also, since he's been playing for so long, he has been a trailblazer for the game in so many different ways, especially in terms of televised poker. He brings so much entertainment in and many new faces to the game. The second individual that we are going to be discussing today is Phil Ivey, the enigma himself. And what makes him an enigma is his aggressive and mysterious, calculated, threatening approach at the poker table that makes him the most feared player in any game. He is also noted and received by the greats as the greatest of all time. Several other major players such as Phil Galfond, there's a lot of Phils going on here, I know, Bryn Kenny and Daniel Negreanu, all major famous names in this game, all note him as a threatening and intimidating player, even to greats like themselves. When deeming anything as the greatest of all time, there are so many factors and so much nuance to boil down and really make a concrete analysis. Today, the established criteria that we are going to be judging both Phil Hellmuth, and Phil Ivey on are overall championships and bracelets, all-time earnings, playstyles and contributions to the game, and public opinion. The first criteria that we are going to be discussing today is championships and bracelets. And the way we judge poker players in terms of bracelets is through World Series of Poker or WSOP wins. And championship earnings is obviously first place. So Phil Hellmuth is undeniably the most decorated player in poker history. He has a whopping 17 wins at the World Series of Poker, and Phil Ivey only has 10. Hellmuth does, however, have over 10 years of experience on Ivey. Hellmuth rose as a prominent player in the 1980s, winning his first bracelet, as said, in 1989. Ivey, on the other hand, rose to fame in the early 2000s. I think that this is a very important detail and a bit of nuance that needs to be mentioned because just looking at the numbers, Phil Hellmuth's got the most rings, and he's got almost double Phil Ivey's rings. However, he's got 10 years of experience on him. So this calls into attention the importance of overall earnings, which is what we're going to be discussing in the next slide. Second piece of criteria that we are going to be discussing today is overall earnings. Phil Hellmuth has a total of over $18 million in total recorded earnings. And this is, and not even sounds like, this is a ton of money. Until you hear Phil Ivey's stats. Phil Ivey has a total of over $48 million in total recorded earnings. And, as noted previously, Phil Ivey's got 10 years less experience in playtime than Phil Hellmuth, and a whopping $30 million more in pure earnings than him. So, as shown here on the all-time money list, Phil Ivey ranks 9th as of 2025, and Hellmuth doesn't even make the top 10. One of the big things that we're going to be discussing in the public opinion category is that Phil Hellmuth doesn't play on nearly as high stakes as Phil Ivey, and it leads a lot of major poker players to assert that he can't be the GOAT if he's not playing with the big dogs, and this is highlighted in his overall earnings and how it's so much less given his experience and time playing. The third piece of criteria that we are going to be discussing today is, in my opinion, one of the most important factors separating Phil Hellmuth and Phil Ivey, and it is innovative playstyle and contributions to the game. Phil Hellmuth's longevity and record-breaking stats have shaped the game of poker as we know it undeniably, and his strategy is very different, and it does focus on exploiting players and utilizing them for an advantage, but not in the way of reading them the way Phil Ivey does. His style is called white magic, and it focuses on exploiting competitors' mistakes rather than focusing on mathematics. And in order to do this project, I had to watch tens, maybe hundreds of hands of poker studying both Phil Hellmuth and Phil Ivey, and this is extremely apparent upon doing my research. A lot of the times, more often than not, Phil Hellmuth is an extremely emotional poker player. That's why he's been known as the poker brat. He's got major temper tantrums when he loses, and he doesn't really take accountability. Something I've noted when he loses, he constantly says, "I feel like I just can't win here," or "it's just not in my favor. I'm losing every hand here." And while there is a degree of luck to poker, absolutely, he can't control what cards he's getting, no, but he can control the amount of money that he is losing. And what Phil Hellmuth does is he plays on tilt. And if you're not sure what tilt is, playing on tilt means that an individual is making aggressive or irrational calls to raises and bets because they are upset about previous hands. They're trying to make aggressive calls in an effort to quickly win their money back. And this is a major habit of Phil Hellmuth, which causes him to not be as taken as seriously as a poker player. Phil Ivey's strategic approach is extremely different than that of Phil Hellmuth's, and it is enigmatic. He is a mysterious and calculated, threatening, dominating presence at the poker table. And not only is he intimidating in the poker room, he takes enjoyment out of being intimidating in his personal life. There was a story told by Phil Galfand who went out to dinner with Phil Ivey, and the waiter came up to them and they said, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Ivey, the sushi cart is backed up. Dinner's gonna come out a little bit later than expected." And Phil Ivey, without missing a beat, looked at him and said, "I lose $3 million here this week, and the sushi cart is backed up." And everyone's kind of sitting there very tense, unsure how to answer him. They're intimidated by him. To which Ivey then just laughs and says, "Oh, it's no rush. I was just kidding with you." That, I feel like, demonstrates the fact that he takes an enjoyment out of being a dominating and intimidating force. So only imagine this in the realm of cards. Phil Ivey utilizes his extreme IQ and knowledge of poker mathematics to be a dominating individual, but he combines this with an extreme EQ of being able to read his competition and call bluffs and perform good bluffs and carry them out. Phil Ivey has an aggressive and a fearless approach to the game of poker. He's a notable shark among the big leagues and consistently plays in the most competitive, high-stakes leagues, to which he often places in the money, if not first place. His play style has been described to create a disparity in focus amongst his competition and really gets their nerves worked up to where they aren't able to make better calls and better reads the way that they would against another player, even like somebody like a Phil Hellmuth. And another factor that gains Ivey his Hall of Fame status, which he was inducted in 2017, is his versatility. Ivey can not only play mixed games, Hold'em, Omaha, No Limit, but he is a master of all of them. The final piece of criteria that we're going to be judging these two players on is the public opinion, and this is the biggest rebuttal against Phil Hellmuth's self-proclaimed GOAT status. So, regardless of his undoubted earnings and championships, he's been deemed the poker brat because of it on the basis of his unwarranted outbursts and his extensive rants that don't just happen periodically, they happen more often than not. He himself asserts that he is a sore loser. So the current number one placeholder on the all-time money list, his name is Bryn Kenny. He makes the common claim that when you think about who the best players are in poker, when you're not playing in the highest levels, you can't be in contention, end quote. And he also made the comment against him that he's the king of AAA maybe, but not the majors. Phil Hellmuth, he's not necessarily a laughingstock amongst the greats, But his contention that he is the greatest of all time is often very diminished by the other greats of the game. However, there is an argument that Phil's record speaks for itself, and in some ways this is true. He is the most decorated player of the game, and he is the only player to win a bracelet in 5 different decades. I've kind of previously touched on this throughout the presentation, but Phil Ivey is mostly praised throughout the community and the greats themselves as the greatest of all time. He does have a little bit of a gambling dispute past, which has in ways a little bit tampered with his reputation with his edge sorting scandals. However, in terms of conversations regarding Ivy as the GOAT, this edge sorting scheme of the past is rarely ever brought up as a point of rebuttal. Something else that I found extremely interesting throughout my research was the way that the public described Phil Ivey and Phil Hellmuth in the titles of their videos. Phil Hellmuth's all draw upon his personality, the entertainment factor, his blow-ups, while Phil Ivey's, on the other hand, more so demonstrate him as a strategic shark, the man who didn't blink. Now that we have discussed both Phil Hellmuth and Phil Ivey, who do you think is the greatest poker player of all time? Do you believe that Hellmuth's statistics prove him to be the ultimate trailblazer for current poker players? Which statistic is of more value to you? Bracelets or overall earnings? To what degree does Hellmuth's practice of playing low-stakes games bar him from being considered the best player of all time? And to what degree should Ivey's past scandals be brought up in the future? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and here are a list of the references that made this presentation possible. Thank you.